Keynote speaker one is Mr. Horacio Rozanski. Mr. Horacio Rozanski is President and Chief Executive Officer of Booz Allen Hamilton, a global management and technology consulting firm serving U.S. and allied governments and Fortune 500 corporations. Mr. Rozanski has been with the company for 27 years, having started as a summer intern in the Buenos Aires office and then joining full-time, based out of Chicago as a consultant to commercial clients. He's been CEO since 2015 and is also a member of the firm's board of directors. Without further ado, keynote speaker one.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'll do this again because this isn't going to go well otherwise. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, much better. It is a real pleasure to be here with you this morning to address future leaders of the United States Navy and the Marine Corps, delegates from so many great universities, faculty, officers. Thank you very much for hosting me. Thank you, Admiral Carter, for inviting me. I have really looked forward to our time together this morning. It's a real privilege to be able to speak to you today. And the theme of this conference, the notion of inside-out leadership, and especially this idea of knowing yourself first as a leader, really spoke to me, and it'll form the basis of some of the things I'd like to share with you today. You heard Admiral Carter talk about some of his experiences, and immediately as a corporate leader, you're reminded of how different it is to lead in a military context where you're taking people into harm's way and to lead in a corporate setting. And I am humbled by that difference, and in preparing for today, I was very aware of that, and I was trying to think about a theme and a topic where my experiences might connect with what many of you will do after you graduate. I had an opportunity about 2 weeks ago to be in a meeting with the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson. I mentioned to him that I was giving this talk, and I had a chance to pick his brain as to what I might want to talk about. One of the things he shared with me was his leadership framework. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read it. It's available on the Navy website. And it's a great document that speaks of character and competency as the twin pillars of effective leadership. And it talks about values and humility and courage and service as the underpinnings of great leadership. I also had the chance to reach to many of my colleagues at Booz Allen. We have 250 Naval Academy graduates in our ranks, some of whom are here today. And I wanted to also run by them, okay, so what might be of interest, what might be in common between what I've experienced in my career and what midshipmen will experience after graduation? And in listening to them, I was reminded of a story that I think will set up the point I will try and make to you today. I had the real privilege about 4 years ago to spend a day and a half on the Carl Vinson. A little newer than the Midway. You fly on the cod, you land at sea, it's a great experience, and the first thing that happens is you get a safety briefing. And after the safety briefing, Master Chief that I had been talking to before we took off for the Carl Vinson comes up to me and he says, well, that briefing skipped one very important point. And I said, well, what might that be? He says, well, do you know what is the scariest sound on a carrier? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, that would be a Lieutenant JG coming up to you and saying, I have a new idea. Now, this is not a new joke. Many of you have heard it probably many times. And to those of you who will be Lieutenant JGs, it's probably a little grating. But I think it sets up the reality of something you will experience early on in your careers, which is the challenge of leading people who are older and more experienced than you are. And because I joined Booz Allen when I was 23, and because I had the fortune of rising through the Booz Allen ranks, I think that is something we have in common. I spent much of my career leading teams that were older and more experienced than I was. Now you look at me now and you say, but you're so old. And it is true that I have some t-shirts that are older than most of you. But I wasn't born old. I was 23. I joined as a consultant with Booz Allen. And my first client said, why should I listen to you? I have grandchildren your age. And I said, well, sir, I'm a lot more expensive than your grandchildren. And he said, well, I'm not so sure about that. But we forged a great friendship, and he was a great client, and the rest is history. But if I've learned something over the many years of having to lead teams, especially teams that out-experienced me, was that to do that effectively, you must really learn to know yourself and be truly honest about who you are with yourself first. You must be willing to show yourself, not as a perfect leader, but as a real human being. And you must really care for the people that you lead. And if you can do those things for real in your own way, you can bridge the gap of experience and age to forming a high-performance team. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'd like to do that in two parts. I have about 10-15 minutes of prepared remarks. And then I'm going to get out from behind this podium, and I would love to take your questions. And I hope you have some questions for me, because I often find that I learn more from your questions than you will learn from my answers. Before I do that, however, let me just do a quick experiment. Before today, how many of you had heard of Booz Allen Hamilton? Maybe by show of hands. That's pretty impressive. That's more than half the room. Well, for those of you who hadn't, we are not a law firm, so don't be scared. And even though Booz is the first word in our name, we do not sell beer or wine, and you don't have to be over 21 to join. We're a collection, a team, really, of 25,000 people who work tirelessly in support of the United States federal government, a few allied governments, and the private sector. We work around the world with a significant presence in the United States. We're actually in all 50 states in some way, shape, or form, and in over 40 countries. We've been in business for over a century, and if you remember just one thing about Booz Allen, it's this. Next year, we will celebrate 80 years of uninterrupted service to the United States Navy. Thank you. Yeah. We began serving the Navy when SecNav Knox in 1940 asked our founder, Ed Booz, to come help him crank up ship production to be ready for World War II. We're extraordinarily proud of that history. I'm extraordinarily proud of the fact that a third of our colleagues are either veterans, military spouses, or reservists. That spirit of service is in our DNA, and it permeates the way we think about our business and everything we do. And that's one of the main reasons that I am so glad to be here today, because as an immigrant, somebody who wasn't born here but who has adopted this country because of its values and because of the opportunities that it presents, I want to express my gratitude to those of you who've made the decision to serve. Thank you. So let me get on with the first topic about how do you lead teams that are more experienced than we are, which is the idea that you really must know yourself if you're going to do that effectively. Think about it this way. This is obvious when I say it, but there's a reality to it. If you're facing into a team that has more experience than you, one of the things that means is they have been led before, and they have probably had several different leaders. And so they have benchmarks in their heads about what makes a good leader and a bad one, and everything in between. And they can peg your strengths and your weaknesses almost right away. And so if you come into that team without having a clear understanding of your own strengths and your own weaknesses, you're at a disadvantage to the team you are trying to lead. You must go beyond the fitness reports. You must go beyond your grades. And you must really search deeply for what makes you strong and what your development areas are. And you have to do this with brutal honesty. Humility comes into it, but not false humility. This isn't about just knowing your weaknesses, because your strengths are the things you're going to leverage to lead effectively. But you must also know that your strengths can also be your weaknesses. I'll give you a personal story. I was that kid in school that when I could answer the math problem before the teacher was done writing it. I generally knew the answer, but for the life of me, I could not tell you why that was the answer. I always lost points for not being able to show my work. And if I thought about it too hard, I started to second guess myself. Now, I think that's a particular strength of mine, the ability to just take a problem and know the answer before we're done explaining it. From a leadership perspective, it's also a weakness, because I lose people along the way. It is just too easy for me to leap to a conclusion, to leap to an answer that may or may not be right, but never garners the buy-in of my teams and, as a consultant, of my clients. That was a great source of frustration until I understood it. I had to do a lot of soul searching and seek help to figure out how to overcome it. And the way I happened to overcome that one is I learned to play Jeopardy. I didn't invent this, it was a suggestion of a friend. He said, just play Jeopardy. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, frame your answer in the form of a question. And by doing that, I learned to bring people along. I gave people an opportunity to challenge my answer, especially if I was more senior. And it made the answer stronger, it made the team stronger, it made us go forward in a better way. So you must know yourself with that brutal honesty that allows you to understand how your team will see you, or else you can't lead. Now, knowing yourself is hard. Showing yourself is even harder. Most of us either are trained to believe, or because we watch too many movies like I do, come to believe that the only great leaders are the perfect ones. Not just the ones that give the great speeches, but the ones that are always right, the ones that are always in command. I will tell you that while those are characteristics of very strong leaders, the ability to show vulnerability and to show who you really are is particularly important, and especially important if you're leading a team that is more experienced than you. Why? Because the minute they see you, all they see is youth and inexperience. And you have to bridge that gap by sharing with them much more than simply that. Again, to be personal about it, one of the things that you experience as an immigrant is you're constantly trying to fit in. I came here at 19, and if you are having a hard time understanding me now, you should have heard me at 19. 1 out of 6 sentences was probably a good batting average for somebody trying to have a conversation with me. And so I taught myself to fit in. I taught myself to laugh at jokes that I didn't think were funny at the beginning. I had one of my great college roommates had to stay up with me, and let's just show my age, we watched Johnny Carson together. And you couldn't pause the TV back then. But during the commercials, he'd tell me why it was funny. Because, humor in Argentina and humor here are different. And so you learn to adapt, but you also self-edit. And I brought that self-editing into my career at Booz Allen, and it created a barrier between me and my teams. Years later, I was a part of an organization called the Center for Talent Innovation, and they did research on diversity topics. And one of the topics that they tackled in a breakthrough piece of research was the fact that while most African American women are leaders in their communities and in their families and their churches, they don't show the same leadership projection in corporate America. And what we learned from that study was that the way we had set up our institutions discouraged people from bringing their full selves to work. It encouraged people from bringing themselves the part that they thought was going to be accepted and appreciated, by the people that led them. Even though that study was not aimed at me, it changed my perspective. It forced me to think about what aspects of my humanity I was leaving at home when I showed up in the office. And when I began to be more willing to talk about myself, to tell stories to audiences like this one about my innermost thoughts, things changed for me. People began relating with me in a different way, at a much more human, at a much more real level. People connected with what I felt and therefore worked with me, not just for me, in a different and much more meaningful way. And that again became particularly powerful with people that were older and more experienced, because it also gave them the permission to tell me what I needed to know, to teach me when I was wrong, and to do it in a way that was deeply caring. That brings me to my third point, which is, yes, to a degree, this is about you as a leader, knowing yourself, showing yourself. But ultimately, this is about the people that you lead, and you cannot lead them effectively if you do not deeply care for them. Now, there's two caveats to this. Caveat number one, you absolutely cannot fake this. If you actually can, you're in the wrong line of work. You should join the Actors Guild. A lot of money to be made in Hollywood by people who can be a different person every day. You must find something you care about. Second thing is, don't kid yourself. You're a human being. You will not care about everyone. You will not care about everything about everyone. So you shouldn't attempt that either. Even though they had a great win, I don't much care for Bill Belichick. You know, I lived in Cleveland for over a decade. He was the coach of the Browns back then, and I just learned to not care for the man. And no matter the many great things that he's done, I just can't get there from here. I also, even though I hope people at Booz Allen would tell you that I actually am very connected to the firm because I grew up there. I cannot care for everything that happens at Booz Allen either. Maybe that makes me a horrible person. I don't know. I got an email the other day from a young woman complaining about her commute to work. And while I do care a lot about her well-being and her safety and her development, the length of her commute was just a step too far for me. And I know that maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, but it's a fact. You cannot care about everything, and you cannot care about everyone. But you must find in yourself and in your team what you will care about and how you will care for them. It has to be genuine to you. No two leaders do it the same way. And it is the only bridge you can build to connect. And the beauty of it is, if your team senses that you care for them, then they will also cut you a ton of slack when, as a relatively new leader facing a more experienced team, they have the challenge of educating you as much as you have the challenge of leading them. This notion of caring really came through to me when I took on this role of CEO, because, like it or not, you become the face of the institution to the outside, but also to the people of Booz Allen. One of the ways in which I try to show that I care is by traveling to all of the places where our people are and spending real time with them, understanding what it is that they do, why they do it, what matters to them, and how can we make it better. So I conduct focus groups everywhere I go. In the 4 years I've had this job, I've done over 100 of them. And they have been really instrumental, I think, to my staying connected to the firm, but also to figure out the path forward. It was one of the early focus groups, actually in Norfolk, where we were finishing up and I was getting ready to leave. And the young man stopped me and he said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And he says, "Well, I'd like to let you know why I will never leave Booz Allen." And obviously, I perked up, that got my attention, and I leaned into a conversation that I will never forget. He says, let me give you a little bit of background of myself. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. I was actually in the military there. And a few years ago, I met an American servicewoman. We fell in love and we married. And when it was time for her to rotate back to the States, it was also time for me to finish my career in the military. I moved to the States with her. She was stationed in Norfolk. That's how I came to be here. Right around the time that we moved here, we found out we were expecting our first baby. Right around that same time, a couple of months later, I joined Booz Allen. So I had been at Booz Allen for 3 or 4 months when I was having the time of my life, enjoying my new country, enjoying my work, getting ready to have a baby. And on the big day when my son was born, my wife died in labor. And he says, here I was, put yourself in his shoes, in a country I didn't know, far away from my family, far away from her family, enjoying the amazing joy of a newborn son and the amazing grief of having lost my wife. And when I thought that I couldn't go through with it, it was my colleagues at Booz Allen that helped me move forward. They embraced me as their family. My colleagues at Booz Allen, my bosses at Booz Allen, taught me to change diapers. They helped me find childcare for my son. They helped me put a life together. They hosted us for holidays. They just took care of us in a way a real family would. And that's why I will never leave Booz Allen. So 4 years later, I have lost track of him. I actually don't know if he's still at Booz Allen or if he isn't. But I will tell you this, it's a story like that that makes me feel that I will never leave Booz Allen. Because I want to spend my career with people that don't waste their energy denying themselves who they are or editing themselves. I want to spend my career with people that spend all of their energy caring for one another, caring for the people they lead, caring for the people that work with them. Because I know that teams like that can accomplish both the possible and the impossible. And I know leaders like that can empower others to change the world. And so I'm here to deliver that message because I hope that you will become those kinds of leaders, that if you ever have to take men and women into harm's way, you will do it with that deep sense of caring, of respect, and of humility that leadership requires, that you will know yourselves, that you will show yourselves, and that you will deeply care for the people you lead in the Navy, the Marine Corps, and whatever institution you end up leading. If you can do that, the future of these institutions and of the people that you lead is bright and assured. Thank you very much. Now comes the easy part for me and the hard part for you. You have to ask me questions.
Well, thank you for coming out today. I just had a quick question. How does a young leader navigate between being vulnerable and understanding with employees under them, but then also being assertive and being able to lead them without being too vulnerable and still be seen as like a strong leader?
That's a great question. I think the question is, what is the definition of strength? One of my first bosses at Booz Allen, I don't know if I ever told this story in public. One of my first bosses at Booz Allen was a screamer. I was once sitting in his office, and he got mad at whoever he was talking to on the phone, and he grabbed the phone and he threw it across the office, over my head, and into the wall. Now, this was the 90s. You could do those things in the 90s. I don't recommend them. I didn't recommend them in the 90s. I don't recommend them now. But, you know, that did not strike me as strong. Leaders who are unwilling and incapable of showing who they really are, I think are mostly viewed as insecure, not as vulnerable, not as strong. I think somebody who's willing to look you in the eye and say, I have a lot to learn from you, even though I am in charge, and I will make decisions, but I will learn from you as I make those decisions, generates the most confidence, especially if the people that you're leading are more experienced than you know, and you know it and they know it. Again, you land on a carrier and they've been there for years. You get on a submarine and they've been there for years. You have to respect that energy and you have to respect that experience. It doesn't mean that you have to be subservient to it. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to do what they say. But if you don't take advantage of what they know, what kind of a leader are you? And again, I mean, I think the notion that you think that people, if you think that people that you lead aren't smart enough to figure all of that out in a nanosecond in your first conversation with you, then maybe you're not fit to lead them. So I think that it is a balance, but it's a balance that I would tilt in favor of showing yourself, letting people know who you are, what you're about, what you care about, and then letting them help you accomplish that.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, sir, for being here today. As a leader, how have you balanced your strengths and weaknesses over your career?
So I think the one thing that I've learned is that those tend to be two sides of the same coin. If I ever wrote a book on leadership, nobody would buy it. But it would be about this notion that your strengths and your weaknesses are actually sides of the coin. People who are extremely eloquent often have a hard time listening. People that take too much input have a hard time deciding. People that are too decisive sometimes don't respect the process that brings teams together and makes that team sustainable. So I think that one of the things is that I have, again, been brutally honest with myself about is, what am I good at? And how can that get in the way of my leadership? And how can that help me? And finding the right balance is essential, especially as you get older and as you progress through your career, because your strengths are going to get sharper. And so what you're likely to do is leverage those more and more and more because you know they lead you to success. And therein lies the challenge. So I am a big believer in understanding your strengths, playing to them, and recognizing when they can trip you. I don't know that I do that perfectly. In fact, I know I don't do that perfectly. So what I try to do is I take a lot of input. Like I said, you know, I do focus groups everywhere I go, and I try and do it with the most junior employees at Booz Allen because I want to hear their voices and because they have a perspective on the firm that I wouldn't have from where I'm sitting right now. Even though one of my strengths is I've been there my whole career, I've had every job from summer intern to CEO. That can also be a weakness if you think that everybody's experience is the same one you've had. So just beware of your weaknesses, but beware of your strengths and manage those carefully.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good morning, sir. My name is Midshipman First Class Paiseki. I just wanted to ask, where did you find the inspiration or the drive to stay with the company for 27 years when you could have probably gone somewhere else and been very successful?
You know, that's an excellent question. I will tell you that I joined Booz Allen. So I joined as a summer intern in 91. I joined full-time in 92, and with the absolute certainty that I was going to stay at Booz Allen for exactly 2 years. And I was just so sure that that was the only answer that made sense. What actually happened to me is I kept getting challenged. About a year and a half into it, and when I would have started to look for another job, I got promoted. And I said, well, I don't know how to do that job, so I'm going to stay until I learn that job. And then a couple of years later, when I was starting to feel like, well, now it's time, I got promoted again. Then Booz Allen offered me, if I stayed, to get a green card. And so I obviously wanted to stay for that. And then one thing led to another. I can't say that I had this grand plan at the ripe age of 23 that I was someday going to be the CEO of Booz Allen. In fact, if somebody had said that to me when I was 23, I would have sent them to rehab. So, you know, it's really been an opportunity year after year after year to learn something new, to do something different, to be inspired, and to work with people that frankly have always pushed me to get better, and never more than in the job that I have now, where I have a bunch of people that I consider to be brilliant, pushing me to do right by them. So that's, you know, that's the honest truth of it. I didn't have this grand vision, but it's been in the people that I work with and in the opportunities that I've been presented with that have allowed me to stay. And then I'll say one last thing is the other thing that happened is over the course of my career, and I hope somebody will ask me this question, over the course of my career, I have had the opportunity to test the values of Booz Allen and see if they align with my values. And every time that the answer was yes, was another link in that chain that was going to keep me grounded.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Hi, how are you? My name is Fernando Luján, and I'm a junior studying in Boston College.
Awesome.
And in Boston College, I lead and co-founded an association for Mexican students.
Okay.
I'm the co-president for that. And my question is, my co-president, we had a falling out last semester in school. And so I was wondering, how do you manage difficult relationships in teams? And how do you move past that conflict to ensure the team succeeds? Yeah, that's my question.
It's a great question. And look, difficult relationships are a fact of life. The most important thing to do is to acknowledge it and to not try to get past it, to try to get into it. I think the mistake that many of us make is to avoid the conflict. Especially as a leader, you avoid the conflict by just essentially asserting your authority. I learned long ago that there's two kinds of authority that you're afforded. You have formal authority and you have moral authority over your team. It is my belief that, and there's a time and a place for both. You're afforded formal authority for a reason, but you earn your moral authority. And the more you over-rely on your formal authority, the more you're going to erode your moral authority. So whether that's a peer relationship or it's a senior to junior relationship, you have to acknowledge the difficulty, and you have to force the sit down. You have to make it come to a head, and you either have to look for a way to get to the other side or look for a way to coexist. As I said, you're not going to care for everybody. Not everybody's going to care for you, and that's just fine if both of you understand that and you have a job to do, and you're willing to acknowledge that you have a job to do and you don't like each other. You can figure out how to get that done. If you paper over it, I think you just make it worse over time.
Gracias.
Mucho gusto. We could have done this in Spanish.
Good morning, sir. My name is Midshipman Second Class Jackson Wheeland. I'm here from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. You mentioned the woman who was complaining about her commute to work.
Yes.
My question for you is, how do you tactfully deal with people who are complaining about the inherent responsibilities of their job that everybody has to deal with?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, you don't tell them that. But you're welcome. You're entitled to think it. I think that, again, I go back to, you have to operate from a position of caring. So it's not that I don't care for this person. I don't care for this argument that she's making, but I care for her. And so I can have a very respectful conversation about why her commute is none of my business. But I will do it in a way that is very respectful. And I will do it in a way that is very honest and candid. And I find that if you treat people with respect, they will accept disagreement and rejection infinitely better than if you treat people with fake compassion or fake condescension. One of the hardest things that you have to do in the private sector is fire somebody. And it's one of the, obviously getting fired sucks. I'll acknowledge that. But having to fire somebody is no picnic either. I had the opportunity in my career to actually lead the personnel function of Booz Allen for several years. And in the course of doing that, I had to exit a number of people from the firm. And what I really learned in that is the importance of respect. And that if I treated somebody I was actually firing with a great deal of respect, I often got a thank you at the end of that conversation, because it acknowledged everything about them that was good, the contribution that they had made, the kind of person that they were. And yes, it didn't work out. And yes, it wasn't right for them to be part of our organization for whatever reason. So it's the same thing with a commute. I can talk to a person and say, I really care deeply about your development, about this and about that, and I want you to have a great experience at Booz Allen, but where you live, how long it takes you to get to work, and the choices that you've made about that are your choices. And I think that's a discussion that you can have that is tactful, is respectful, but it's also clear that says, look, I'm not going to solve your commute problem. And then I think that what you get out of that is a thank you, and if you have a person that is intelligent and self-reflecting, you also get somebody who learns from that experience that maybe that wasn't the smartest email to send the CEO of the company that you work for. But you got to let people get there on their own.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Midshipman Second Class Alana Phillips.
Good morning.
You talk about the necessity of knowing ourselves. How can we best get to know ourselves better?
I think that one of the two things are underrated in command positions, in leadership positions. One is giving yourself time to think. We're all so busy, and we're all so action-oriented, and we're all so eager to get things done. And two is the willingness to ask questions. Because again, there can be a perception that asking questions is a form of weakness. I usually don't ask for directions, and it makes my wife crazy. Waze solved all of that, so technology solves all problems. But it doesn't make her crazy because I'm so smart that I need to ask. It makes her crazy because it's dumb not to ask for directions when you need them. But I really do believe that as leaders, we have a responsibility, indeed an obligation, to find time to think, to find time to reflect, to find time to ponder. When people ask me what my job description is as CEO, I say, well, I have a very simple job description. I have to think of all the things nobody else is thinking about at Booz Allen. Because if I don't find the time to do it, if I don't put my head up over the horizon, nobody else can. Nobody else has my vantage point. Nobody else gets to decide their agenda like I do. So as a leader, you have to spend time knowing yourself. And people do that in lots of different ways, and there's no two ways that are right. People take courses, people take tests, people meditate, people work out, people ask for feedback. You will find your way to knowing yourself better than you do today if you decide that that's a priority to you and you make it a priority. And my argument to everybody in this room is if you don't make it a priority, it'll come to hurt you because your teams will know you better than you know yourself, and that will erode your capacity to lead. So all of the busy time that you spend avoiding that question isn't time well spent. You just have to get your head into it.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Good morning, sir.
morning.
Thank you for your speech. I'm a biology student at Case Western Reserve University in
Excellent.
Cleveland. So you talked a lot about deeply caring about the people that you serve and the people that you lead, and I think this is a concept that crosses all disciplines, whether you're in the military, advocacy, or medicine.
Absolutely.
And when you do deeply care about the people you serve, like oftentimes it becomes a very emotionally and mentally tasking kind of job. So how do you cope with that and prevent things like burnout?
You know, I think the beauty of caring for the people that you lead is that it is everything that you said, but it's also deeply energizing. When people that you care about succeed, it's an extraordinary feeling. I will tell you, when I was expecting our first daughter, I remember I was walking on the beach with my dad, and he said to me, "You have to understand that everything good that happens to your daughter will be 10 times better than if it happens to you, and anything bad that happens to your daughter will be 10 times worse than if it happens to you." And I listened to him politely because he's my dad, but I don't think I understood that until I held the baby. And the same is true, I think, in leadership. If you care deeply about the people that you lead, you will suffer their mistakes more than they will suffer them, but you will enjoy their victories more than anything. And it's in building a team that can have more successes than failures. It's an extraordinarily energizing and life-affirming priority. And then when you get to the point in your career, as some of us in this room are, when you start to think about what's your legacy going to be, it is almost certain for most of us that our legacy is going to be about the people that we mentor, the people that we led, and the places that they will go after we ride into the sunset. So I think you got to keep your eye on that, and I think you have to just allow yourself the opportunity to enjoy the successes of your team and the victories of your team as their victories, not yours. And that energy will carry you forward.
Thank you.
Of course.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Shipman, second class, Dan Malarski. I know you said the reason that you stayed at Booz Allen was the culture that was created and propagated there, but how at the CEO level do you maintain and sustain that culture top down?
That's an extraordinary question. And it's a question that I began to face in my career after my teams got large enough that I couldn't get to know everybody personally. When I first started and I was leading a group of 5, 10, 20, 30 people, I could spend a lot of time with them and really get to know them. And they got to know me. And we forged that bond, and that created a culture. When you start going, you start adding zeros to that, and 20 becomes 200, and 200 becomes 2,000, and 2,000 becomes 20,000. Your ability to build a personal link with people is limited by time and space. And so you have to think about what words you use much more carefully, because your words and the way in which you show and your actions will travel further than what you're thinking they will. 2 stories about that. I talked about having a baby. When my daughter was born, the first thing that happens to a new parent is you get no sleep. And that's exactly what happened to me. I got no sleep. And so I would show up in the office dragging. And people thought Booz Allen was going to go bankrupt because I showed up in the office dragging. And everybody thought, something really bad must be happening. And so I had to learn to explain to people, I slept 45 minutes last night. That's why I'm dragging. The company's doing great. But beyond that, I have learned to work carefully on articulation of themes that really matter to me and repetition of those themes so that people can hear it and absorb it and so forth. As a leader, what you talk about is what people assume matters to you. So if you talk about the weather more than you talk about their safety, they'll assume you care about the weather more than you care about their safety. In your own head, you think that's crazy, but that's what you're projecting. I spend a lot of my time in this job talking about our purpose and our values as an institution. I would say in terms of my internal conversations, I spend about half of my time talking about our purpose and our values. We have concluded after 100 years of being in business that we exist to empower people to change the world. That's Booz Allen's reason to exist. And I talk about that constantly. My colleagues who are here will tell you that they're sick of hearing it. But they're not either, because they turn around and they do that exactly with their teams. Leave you with this thought. David Gergen said about the Reagan White House that the key to communication is to understand that once you got sick and tired of saying something, they barely started to hear you. So the key to setting a culture and to sending a message is to be very clear to what it is, to try and make it concise, and then to repeat it until you're so tired of saying it that they might actually hear you. And the larger the organization you lead, the more important that becomes.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is
morning.
Hallie Rose. I'm a student from Case Western Reserve University. Over the course
Cleveland
of
is representing today. I love it.
Cleveland. Over the course of your career, do you think there's been a particular failure that you have learned the most from?
Oh, so many. So as I mentioned earlier, I learned a lot from my inability to persuade people of what I was certain was the right answer. As I went on in my career, let me think about which one of the many failures is worth talking about in polite company. So this is something I learned as a consultant. I have learned that if you have never been fired by your client, you're probably not a very good consultant. Now, I will say the second part to that is if you always get fired by your client, you're probably also not a very good consultant. But part of consulting is helping people see the truth and the reality beyond what they're willing to see. Part of leadership is the ability to do that. And part of leadership in a large organization is this notion of speaking truth to power. And, they say, well, the truth sometimes hurts. It's true. And the truth sometimes hurts the person delivering it. The first time that I was let go by a client, I was devastated. I thought my career was going to come to an end. In truth, I actually think what I learned from that, both good and bad, made me a much better consultant. I got fired by the client for doing two things, one very good one and one very bad one. One is I knew what the truth was, and I said it, and they didn't want to hear it. Two was I didn't find a way to say it that persuaded them. And so I made it too easy for them to just exit us out and go on with their lives. There was a company that is no longer in existence, so there might have been something to the point I was trying to make. But it was really important for me to understand that in that failure and in the speaking truth to power part of it, there was both strength and weakness. There was both success, professional integrity, and failure. Because having, as I said before, having the answer is interesting. Mobilizing people around an answer is important. And being able to get that done and learning when you succeeded and learning when you failed is deeply, deeply important.
Thank you.
Sure. How are you doing?
Good morning,
I think
sir.
I get time for two more questions. So 2 more people standing at the mics. Perfect.
Good morning. My name is
morning.
Alexandria Agee, and I'm a student at Loyola University, Maryland.
Awesome.
My question for you is, you talked a lot about leadership qualities within yourself, but I was wondering, in regards to your experience, how have you strengthened and cultivated those leadership qualities for those who you're leading?
That's an outstanding question. So, I find that the most important thing when you're mentoring somebody is to understand what their goals are and to try and be selfless about that. It is too common Because one of the challenges, frankly, on our diversity journey is too common to try and impose ourselves and our footprint and our success model onto other people, assuming that they share the same goals that you share, assuming that they share the same views that you share. Depending on how you measure generations, we have 4 or 5 different generations coexisting at Booz Allen. And I will tell you that a millennial and a baby boomer don't see the world the same way. I'm sure everybody in this room both understands and agrees that. And it's deep even at the level of what people care about and what the definition of success. So the first step, I think, in cultivating anybody through their career is to understand what is it that they're trying to achieve, to be agnostic about that, meaning, well, why is it that you don't want to get promoted? Or why is it that you only want to get promoted to this rank? Or why is it that you value work-life balance differently than I do? Or why is it that you're going to change jobs every 3 years? Accept that as their framework, and then look to optimize what you can teach them inside of that framework. That requires, again, a level of humility, because any of us who've had some form of success in our professional careers think we're great, and that therefore everybody should want to be like us. And I tell you, you don't want to be like me. And you want to be you. And my job is to help you become the best leader that you can be, as opposed to try and help you replicate. Now, my experiences, my strengths, my weaknesses, to the extent that I can help you with some of what I've learned, it accelerates your journey. But it's your journey, and I have to help you, as opposed to try and map that journey out to you based on my values and my desires. And that, to me, is the absolute key to any form of mentoring, and certainly when you're trying to train somebody to lead, because leadership is, as I've tried to make it clear today, a deeply personal thing that no two people do the same way. And so I cannot teach you to lead the way I do it. I can help you be the best leader that you're going to be based on who you are.
Thank you.
Sure. And you get the last question.
Good morning, sir. My name is Ken Wallace. I'm a senior political science student at Elizabethtown College.
Okay.
Undoubtedly, one of the skills a leadership assess is listening, the ability to listen. So I was wondering, beyond taking the time to meet up with someone to discuss their comments and concerns, maintaining eye contact throughout that conversation, and really thinking through your responses to that person, how do you show the people within your organization that you are listening and that you're there to support them?
You know, the most important thing after a listening session is after a listening session. Meaning, if I sit with you and I listen to you for an hour, I walk out of there and I don't do anything different, then the 30 seconds of feeling validated and empowered that you will feel will be followed by hours of cynicism about, oh, this was just an exercise. There was no real meaning to it. So Ginny Barassia and I travel together everywhere I go. I am a horrible note taker, but Ginny is outstanding. And we review the notes after the focus groups, or after any meeting that I have like that, and I make sure that we have clear action items and that something happens. Sometimes what happens is they coming back and saying, you know, I heard you, and we're not going to do what you suggested for the following reasons. I think that is much better than vacuum. It's both disappointing but empowering to know that the organization looked at your suggestion even if it was turned down. Sometimes it is, oh, that's such a good idea, we're going to go do it. And sometimes it is, hey, thank you, I learned something new. If I put it together with these other things that I've learned, it takes me over here that I wouldn't have gone without you. But I think it is, the art of listening is not just in the listening, but it's in the acting on the other side. And if you go back to this notion of knowing yourself and knowing also what kind of a listener you are. Are you a listener that asks a lot of questions? Are you a listener that is an impatient person, so you're not going to listen forever? And crafting showing yourself, meaning are you being, not faking the eye contact and everything else, but are you really being you in that conversation? And then if you deeply care, you'll figure out what to do, what you learn from that, where the people that you lead will naturally understand and that you cared and you did something about it, or that at least you considered it carefully. And if you can do that, then the rest is history. People do feel, I will say this not just as somebody who's now leading, but as somebody who's been led for most of my career by really great leaders. I stayed at Booz Allen because I always felt empowered. And I felt empowered because the people that I worked with listened to me. And oftentimes like I said, nothing happened. They were clear that what I was saying didn't make any sense to them, but they were listening. And that's what mattered to me. That's what matters to me now in my leadership role. And I think that's what matters to the people of Booz Allen. Again, we're just talking, Mary Motherway, who's a Naval Academy grad, and I were talking, and she was saying, well, I'm not sure that I would get admitted to the Naval Academy if I was applying now against the competition that's in this room. And I always feel, I don't think I get hired by Booz Allen if I was competing against the people that we're hiring now. But you owe people like that a real debt. They're extraordinarily talented. They're going to spend part of their career or all of their career with you. In the case of the military, they may give their life in the service of this great country. And so you owe them your very best, and you owe them the ability as a leader to listen, to guide them, and to empower them to change the world. So thank you, and thank